Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. If you've ever stared at a pharmacy receipt and felt your jaw literally hit the floor, well, you're definitely in the right place. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating, really high-stakes mystery, the true economics of owning a pharmaceutical company. We're going to pull back the curtain on an industry that routinely posts some of the highest profit margins on the planet, yet simultaneously produces the modern miracles that keep millions of people alive. So, how does this incredible machine actually work? Let's find out. To really understand where all that money goes, we've got to rewind a bit to a story that absolutely blew up the headlines back in September of 2015. You probably remember this. A young hedge fund manager named Martin Shkreli acquired the rights to a decades-old antiparasitic drug called Daraprim. Now, it's important to note this was definitely not some new cutting-edge breakthrough. The chemical formula had been sitting in the public domain since the 1950s. But almost overnight, something incredible and highly controversial happened to its price tag. The price for a single pill of Daraprim skyrocketed from $13.50 to $750. That is a price hike of over 5,000%, literally in a single morning. There was no negotiation, no warning. Shkreli pulled this off by tightly restricting the drug's distribution to just a single pharmacy, which meant generic competitors couldn't even get their hands on a sample to test and reverse engineer. Naturally, people were furious. Congress held hearings. But listen, if we just write this off as the story of one greedy villain, we are missing the much bigger picture. See, Shkreli wasn't a glitch in the Matrix. He didn't invent some magical new loophole. What he did was take the standard operating mechanics of the entire industry and lay them totally bare, just without the usual polite camouflage. Take insulin, for example. It's a century-old medicine that costs roughly $130 a year to manufacture, yet that exact same year's supply is routinely billed for up to $1,200 in the US. Or look at Humira. It costs around $500 to physically make a course of treatment, but the American healthcare system is charged close to $80,000 for it. So you have to ask yourself, if the physical chemicals are this cheap to make, what exactly are we paying for? All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the myth of the pill. Okay, so to really grasp this industry, you've got to totally change how you look at the product itself. The pill, the vial, the auto-injector, that is not the actual product. The pill is merely the physical delivery mechanism. The real product, the asset being bought, sold, and fiercely defended in court by armies of lobbyists and lawyers, is a temporary, government-enforced legal monopoly. In the United States, a patent lasts for 20 years. That sounds like a pretty long time to have a monopoly, right? But here is the catch. That countdown clock starts ticking the moment a company files the patent, which usually happens during early-stage discovery, years before the drug ever touches a human patient. By the time a chemical compound survives clinical testing and finally gets FDA approval, somewhere between 8 and 13 years of that 20-year window have literally burned away. What's left is shockingly short, often just 7 to 12 years of actual real-world commercial exclusivity. Now, because that patent window is just so incredibly short, companies desperately need a backup plan. And this brilliantly illustrates how the whole system adapts. Regulators actually hand out an entirely separate layer of protection called marketing exclusivity. This has absolutely nothing to do with a patent. A genuinely new chemical gets 5 guaranteed years where no generic can even apply. A biologic drug, one that's grown in living cells, gets a massive 12 years. If you target a rare disease, you get 7 years, and if you run a pediatric trial at the FDA's request, they tack on an extra 6 months just for testing on kids. The name of the game here is all about extending that clock. Which brings us to Section 2, a billion-dollar gamble. So you might be wondering, why on earth does the government hand out these super lucrative monopolies in the first place? Well, it's because building the thing worth protecting is an almost unbelievably expensive gamble. To bring just one single new drug to the market, a pharmaceutical company has to spend anywhere from $985 million on the low end, up to a staggering $2.5 billion. And the scariest part for them, going in, nobody actually knows if the science will even work. Imagine a clinical gauntlet, 10,000 chemical compounds synthesized in a lab. Only 10 make it into human phase 1 safety testing. Out of those, maybe 3 survive to phase 2 to see if they actually treat the disease. By phase 3, which are these massive $100 million global trials, you're down to about 1.5 compounds. Statistically, 9 out of 10 drugs that enter human testing will completely fail. That means the one drug that actually makes it across the finish line has to carry the massive financial weight of the 9 dead ends that didn't. And that insane failure rate, it completely changes how this business operates. You just can't look at a pharma company the way you look at a car factory. A traditional manufacturer relies on linear profit scaling, right? You sell more cars, you make more money. But Wall Street treats pharma companies way more like venture capital funds. The industry totally relies on lopsided, asymmetric wins. Take Merck's cancer drug Keytruda. It brings in over $20 billion a year all on its own, which effectively funds the rest of the company's entire research pipeline. You just need one massive blockbuster to cover dozens of failures. But man, when they do hit that blockbuster, the returns are staggering. Just compare the operating margins across different industries. Grocery stores operate on razor-thin 1 to 3% margins. Airlines clear maybe 4 to 8%. Even software, which is basically the gold standard of modern profitability, sits between 20 and 35%. But pharmaceutical companies, protected by these government-granted monopolies, they regularly post operating margins between 25 and 45%. They dominate almost every other sector in the global economy. Now, I should mention, there is one really fascinating recent exception to this rule where the physical manufacturing actually did matter. We've all heard of the GLP-1 drugs, things like Ozempic and Wegovy. Demand for these weight loss miracles outran supply so badly that people were actually rationing doses. But here's the twist. The bottleneck wasn't the chemical formula. That was largely settled. The real barrier to entry became the incredibly precise, sterile manufacturing of millions of glass cartridges and auto-injector pens. So, in this rare case, the physical factory itself became a moat that was just as valuable as the legal patent. All right, moving on to Section 3, the middleman price trap. Setting the physical manufacturing side of things apart for a second, who is actually footing the bill for these blockbuster drugs? Because let me tell you, the list price you hear shouted on the evening news is often a complete and utter mirage. This dynamic creates what's known as the gross-to-net bubble. In the US, the person actually taking the pill is almost never the person paying full price. Manufacturers negotiate massive rebates with insurers behind closed doors, and this creates this bizarre financial gap between the loud public list price and the quiet private net price the drug maker actually takes home. This literally means a drug company can continuously raise a drug's public price while their actual revenue per pill stays completely flat. So who exactly is pocketing that massive gap? Enter the middlemen, known as pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs for short. Just 3 companies, CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, and OptumRx, control over 80% of this market. They are the ultimate gatekeepers. And here's the truly bizarre, twisted incentive structure. PBMs actually prefer drugs with higher list prices. Why? Because a higher list price means they get to negotiate a larger rebate pool, of which they often keep a very healthy slice. So who gets punished in this tangled web? The patients paying in cash or those stuck on high-deductible plans. They never see those secret discounts. They're stuck paying the inflated list price that was artificially pumped up just to feed the middlemen. Which sets us up perfectly for Section 4, surviving the generic cliff. Okay, so the pricing is wild. The middlemen hold all the cards, and the whole system is built around protecting a temporary monopoly. But what exactly happens on the very day that monopoly finally expires and generic competitors are allowed to flood in? The industry calls this the generic cliff, and honestly, it is absolutely brutal. The exact moment a standard small molecule drug loses its patent, generic copies hit the pharmacy. Because the generics didn't have to pay for that billion-dollar discovery process, they can compete entirely on price. This instantly wipes out 80 to 95% of the original brand's revenue, sometimes within mere months. Now, biologic drugs, the complex ones grown in living cells, they face a slightly softer cliff. Making copies of them, which are called biosimilars, is highly complex and requires a super expensive approval pathway. This extra difficulty slows the bleeding a bit, so revenue might only drop 30 to 50%. But hey, a drop is still a major drop, and these companies will do almost anything to delay it. To survive this terrifying cliff, pharma companies gear up for intense legal warfare. They don't just rely on one core patent, oh no. They build what lawyers call a patent thicket. This is a massive legal wall created by filing dozens, sometimes hundreds, of secondary patents around a single drug. They'll patent the specific coating on the tablet, the crystal structure of the molecule itself, even the specific dosing schedule. It's all entirely designed to make it legally impossible for competitors to enter the market without triggering an absolute avalanche of lawsuits. The absolute textbook example of this strategy in action is Humira. At its peak, this drug was pulling in over $20 billion a year. That's billion with a B. To protect that colossal revenue stream, they built a fortress of roughly 130 active patents. But here is the most crucial detail. Nearly 90% of those patents were filed after the drug was already approved and making billions. This wasn't about protecting new science at all. This was pure legal fortification.
And guess what? It worked beautifully. It locked out U.S. competitors until 2023, buying the company 5 extra years of exclusivity. 5 extra years on a $20 billion a year drug? I mean, that is the entire business model right there.
And honestly, patent thickets are just one tool in their toolbox. Companies also use a tactic called evergreening, where they release a just slightly modified version of the same drug, like maybe a once-daily pill instead of a twice-daily one, just to secure a fresh, brand-new patent. There's also product hopping, actively steering patients to the newer patented version right before the old one expires. They even engage in something called pay for delay, where they literally pay generic competitors cash to just delay their launch. And increasingly, the giant pharma companies don't even take the scientific risks themselves anymore. They just buy it. Look at Pfizer's $43 billion acquisition of Seagen. Large pharma often lets small, venture-funded startups take the really risky early-stage bets and then uses their enormous checkbooks to simply buy certainty later on. But listen, all this aggressive maneuvering and risk shifting, it works great right up until it doesn't. And when failure hits, it happens on a scale that can literally threaten the entire enterprise. Back in 2004, Merck had to pull its painkiller Vioxx from the market due to cardiovascular risks, which eventually led to $4.85 billion in settlements. Purdue Pharma's deceptive marketing around OxyContin forced the company into total bankruptcy. Pharma companies don't view these lawsuits as some rare, unpredictable anomaly. They literally build litigation reserves directly into their financial planning. It's exactly the same way a massive oil company budgets well in advance for a potential oil spill. And that brings us to Section 5, the ultimate threat. Looking ahead to the next decade, you might be surprised to hear that the biggest threat to this massively lucrative model isn't a rival pharma company. And it isn't even a mega lawsuit. The ultimate threat is the exact same entity that grants the monopolies in the first place, the government. See, for decades, the U.S. stood apart from nations like the UK, Germany, and Canada by simply refusing to directly negotiate drug prices. But that changed with the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, which now allows Medicare to directly negotiate prices on select, high-spending drugs. This is actively shifting global strategies right now. To protect their incredibly lucrative American margins, some pharma companies are now deliberately delaying drug launches in lower-priced international markets. Why? Because a low price abroad could be used as leverage to drag down the U.S. price. It's literally forcing the industry to prioritize medical research solely based on what carries the absolute highest pricing potential. And really, that leads us right to the profound paradox at the heart of this entire explainer. We're looking at a completely ruthless machine, right? One built to extract maximum financial value from a temporary monopoly. Yet, it is the exact same financial incentive structure that drives the research quietly saving millions of lives every single day. Both of these things are true at once. As the quote perfectly captures, when you look at this industry, you are never really buying a chemical. You are buying a countdown clock. It's a limited window to be the only legal seller of something people simply cannot live without. Which brings us to the final lingering thought of the day. Every single patent trick, every intense middleman negotiation, every multi-billion-dollar acquisition, it is all built entirely on the foundation of pricing power. So if governments around the world continue to chip away at the pricing power that makes this massive, high-risk model viable, can the pharmaceutical industry actually survive in its current form? It's a hugely complex question, and one that is absolutely going to define the future of modern medicine. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.